there are so many people at work that want to upgrade, that want to grow in their career, but they themselves are not fully aware of all the available opportunities out there. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do at a foundational level in terms of exposing people to different career paths. The big issue is not mapping out your career. And as you rightfully said, a lot of people don't know what comes after graduation, which puts a lot of graduates in a very uncomfortable predicament because I've got the qualification, but what can I actually do with it? The difficult part of this is that we've got an unemployment crisis that we can't ignore in South Africa, with more than half of our youth neither in employment, education, or training. So what that does is it also creates an atmosphere of desperation.
The Groundbreakers, Mondays to Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. on TUT FM.
Welcome back. It is definitely 25 minutes before the hour 8 o'clock. And let me remind you that if you just tuned in your radio station, just know that you are listening to TUT FM 96.2. We amplifying voices, empowering lives. And this is the Groundbreakers. And on a Wednesday, you know what we have, a Plug Graduate Edition. And as many people may know that graduating is a significant milestone, but it is often followed by the daunting task of navigating the job market. And tonight we'll explore how to build a successful path post-graduation. And our guest is Assistant Business Consultant from Boston City Campus, who is here to guide us through practical strategies for finding employment, internships, and creating opportunities. Now, let me give you a brief bio about him. I have to say his name is Mr. Njabulo Malusi Buthelezi, who is an award-winning professional with 8 years of experience in various capacities within the educational sector. He is currently a business consultant, like I mentioned, at Boston City Campus, where he's responsible for leading the institution's public and private partnership initiative, which seamlessly ties with his passion to increase access to education in sub-Saharan country, South Africa. And outside of work, he's an avid traveler. And Mr. Buthelezi, good evening and welcome to TUTFM.
Good evening, Mr. Madisa. I'd like to thank you firstly for inviting me to your show. It's an honest pleasure to be on tonight's show and to get to share some of my experience with your audience.
Definitely true. That's what we deal with here. We want to start off this question to say now, I was doing some research and I found that according to the South African Graduate Employers Association, 63% of employers believe that graduates lack sufficient career guidance. Now, I'll bring this question to say to you, how can universities and the career services enhance their career guidance programs to better prepare graduates for the job market, sir?
Oh, that's actually a very good question. So thank you for that question, Mr. Madisa. So I think there's different elements to that question, and I'll try and break it down to make it as easy as possible for everyone to understand. So I think around work readiness, not enough is done in terms of career guidance programs to get graduates ready for the workplace. Now, I always talk about a 5-point approach, but to bring it back to the very beginning, how do graduates get the skills that are required by employers? And it starts off by understanding and knowing what employers are looking for, and which is a starting point in terms of guiding graduates in the right direction. The other elements of that is, as a graduate, you need to start thinking about what we call career mapping. So as soon as I graduate, what do I want to do? And most importantly, where do I want to do it? So that's the starting point for graduates. In terms of the skills mismatch, which is actually a very interesting statistic that you put forward about the 63%. It's because for a very long time, career updates and what's required in the workplace has far outpaced what we can produce timelessly in education. So that's where the mismatch is, that you're getting this qualification, so you've got a base. And you would know this very well, Mr. Madisa. You learn something in theory, whether that's in radio or broadcasting, but then when you're on air and you're on the waves, it's completely different. Then the theoretical element, there's a mismatch between the theoretical element and what you actually get to experience in the workplace. And this is why graduates need to start thinking about where they want to head to, what skills are actually required. And I always recommend experiential learning in that sense. So always try and take up some summer vacation work. And that's how you get a sense of what's actually happening in the workplace and what are some of the skills that you need when you compare them to some of the skills that you lack.
And now, let me start off to say this. Shouldn't some of these issues have started from high school? Because I think some of the issues start there. You find people that are studying something that they're not really sure what it's all about. You go into a certain university's website, you try to apply, and you say, APS score is 21, and then eventually when you get out there, that you see I'm having problems because that's not who you are, and you don't fit in there. Don't you think that maybe our educational systems should start there in our high schools or even primary, trying to see what's a kid passionate about, what is it that they love doing, then they can start it from there?
No, I 100% agree with that, Mr. Madis. So, in terms of what we do on our side, there's a lot of work that we've done in terms of going out to high schools and exposing learners to the different career paths that are available. I am guilty of this myself. I mean, when I got to UJ many years ago,
Yeah.
it was the first time I'd ever heard of a BCom law qualification. And that kind of really speaks to exactly what you're saying, that we come out of high school with only an idea of what we want to do, but without the full knowledge of what's out there and what's available. And there's a lot of scope for educational institutions to do groundwork at high schools to educate learners about the choices that are available. And it's not even just learners, Mr. Madis. There's a lot of conversations that we've had with corporate organizations about doing the same, even at the workplace.
Oh, yes.
Because there are so many people at work that want to upgrade, that want to grow in their career, but they themselves are not fully aware of all the available opportunities out there. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do at a foundational level in terms of exposing people to different career paths. And then there's also a lot of societal norms that guide people in a certain direction. The buzzword now, STEM qualifications. And like you rightfully said, if the buzzword is STEM qualifications, and this is what I'm hearing, this is where I can make money, I'm going to want to do an engineering course without full understanding and exposure that the money is only a consequence, but you still need to love what you do. And I think a lot of work needs to be done around that. There's also been a lot of misconceptions in societies about people saying that these qualifications are useless, that this is what you should study. And I think a lot of that influences the choices that learners eventually make.
And definitely, just today, I was speaking to one of our news readers to saying, don't you want to come this side of the desk and see how things going? Because I don't think you could just focus on doing news reading. At some point you want to elevate, but that's a very beautiful point that you make there. And my content producer was studying the Human Sciences Research Council and found that only a small fraction of South African graduates had a clear understanding of their career goals upon graduation. Now, what steps can graduates take to identify and clarify their career goals early in their academic journey?
Oh, that's actually one of the 5 points that I prepared for you today, Mr. Madisa. So I like calling that. That's the second element of what I call the 5-point system. So that relates to career mapping and thinking about where do you want to head off and what do you want to do after you graduate. So I think let's break the problem down into 3 points. So we'll talk about the mistakes, the interpretation of the mistakes, and ultimately the solution. So if you look at the first point, the big issue is not mapping out your career. And as you rightfully said, a lot of people don't know what comes after graduation, which puts a lot of graduates in a very, very uncomfortable predicament because I've got the qualification, but what can I actually do with it? Now, the root cause of that is not thinking about work. And a lot of us are guilty of this. When you're in varsity, you're thinking about finishing the course, but you're not thinking about what comes after you finish the course.
True.
And there's a lot of workshops, and sometimes corporates come and do corporate presentations. But even in those presentations, it's a recruitment exercise instead of an educational exercise. Mm-hmm. And again, the problem persists. Now, the solution to that is, I always say, before you even graduate, think about what you want to do in the next 12 months, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years. And Polelo, the difficult part of this is that we've got an unemployment crisis that we can't ignore in South Africa, with more than half of our youth neither in employment, education, or training. So what that does is it also creates an atmosphere of desperation. So any job that I can get,
I take it.
and that first job is so important because that sets the tone for what comes after. And a lot of us don't think about that. It's just, even if a graduate was to reach out to me today, no, Mr. Buthelezi, anything that you can give to me, instead of saying, I want a junior broadcaster role at a specific radio station. If I cannot get it there, this is my alternatives. And I think it's balancing that element, but we also have to go back and look at the context of the country. So that desperation is fueled by unemployment. But graduates need to start thinking about, where do I want to go and how do I actually get there? And that's around career mapping. And Mr. Madisa, I'm happy to do it in a future session where we look at what does that look like practically. But I always say, for me, this is my branch. This is what I've studied. Now, what can I do with what I've studied? Then you look at the different fields that you can go into. So if you did a communications degree, you can go into public relations, you can go into marketing, you can go into consulting. There's a multitude of different parts. Then you start saying, what are some of my inherent qualities? I speak well, I'm very creative. Then you start looking at, where is that needed most? Oh, probably in public relations and marketing. So you narrow it down now to these two parts. Then you start researching these two parts, and then you identify that, in fact, marketing appeals more to me. Okay, so if I want to get to this part in marketing, where do I start that journey? And that's that element that's important. Thinking about where you start that journey. And a lot of them, and even at TUT, you'll find that there are a lot of communications graduates coming out at the end of 2024, but no one's thought about, what am I actually looking for? I'm looking for an internship.
Yeah.
Every time I've spoken to a graduate, it's, I'm looking for an internship. And my question is always, what internship? Any internship. And that was already the wrong answer. Because if you say any internship, that could be an array of different fields. And then you find out that you don't like what you found yourself in, because your thinking was, I need to get something, instead of, I need to get something specific.
True, definitely. I have to agree with you 120% there. I remember over the weekend, I was speaking to a friend of mine who graduated a couple of years back, I think in 2018, hasn't found really any work ever since that. And she was saying to me, oh, Junior, man, I need anything, man, anything, just that, because looking at the unemployment rate within the country, it's very severe. And coming to emphasize what you're saying, a couple of my classmates before we graduated, they were then saying, after we have completed our wheel, they were saying, I don't think journalism is the road that I want to go down. But I was then saying, no, but journalism has many aspects. You need to then look to say, I'm comfortable in this, because we were used to be out on the fields covering stories. I remember I was covering one in Soshanguve, and they shot something, and then I was like, field reporting, it's not for me. I'd rather stay in the studio. But eventually, now the Department of Higher Education and Training has highlighted that aligning career goals with industry needs can significantly improve employment prospects. Now, the question around the statement then comes to say, how can South African graduates align their career goals with the current job market demands?
That's actually a very, very good one. So I have to agree with the department in its research, and a lot of the work that the department puts out is backed by research. I think the reality of, kind of how graduates can bridge this divide is actually acknowledging that the divide exists. I think there's a misconception that a lot of graduates and people in the broader society have, that once you've been taught something, you know it. And to some extent that is true. But where the mismatch is you know what you've been taught, but you haven't been taught to apply it. And that's where the big issue is. So then that goes back to a skills question. So what are some of the skills that I need to learn as a graduate? That goes back to the first point around career mapping. So when I map out my career, I'll find out that someone who's in graphic design needs exposure to Canva, they need exposure to Adobe Photoshop, And all these elements that you don't necessarily get exposure to in university. And then the question that you need to ask yourself is, how do I go about acquiring those skills? And I think a lot of graduates surprisingly learn on the job what is required instead of knowing what's required beforehand. So if you're taking a career in finance as an example, Excel is going to be a very large part of your job. But a lot of people graduate with a BCom degree without the Excel skills that they need in the workplace. And that's a result of not mapping out your career. Because when you map out your career, you don't just ask yourself, Mr. Madisa, what it is that I can do, but you ask yourself, how can I do it? And I think those are the questions that we're not asking. Also, on the elements of skills, I think one of the biggest ones that I've seen in terms of, kind of hundreds of interviews that I've done and graduates that we've hired, graduates that we've put in learnerships and graduates that we've helped with internships is a lack of communication skills and undermining the importance of communication. When you do a BA degree, English is almost compulsory for most BA degrees. I wish that was the case across the board, because one of the biggest elements that, kind of hinder graduates is, I've seen this a lot, having interviewed fantastic graduates with amazing backgrounds from great universities, TUT included. And one of the biggest elements that I identified was, I would always say, this person speaks about this element of passion. Let me give them a chance. And Polelo, so then there's another layer that I'm trying to get to here, that it's not so much that graduates don't have skills. They do not know how to communicate those skills. And that for me is probably the biggest element. That's actually kind of big in the job market, because a lot of graduates have the skills and they learn these elements, and a lot of them have practiced it. They think of coding, something practical. But if you can code, and that's what you do, but you can't tell me about the languages that you know. You can't tell me about the projects that you've done. The assumption by the employers, and I'm saying that sometimes in these cases, the employers are wrong about the assumptions, to say, no, but Mr. Madisa doesn't have the skills. It's not that. In most cases, it's not necessarily that. It's the ability to communicate the skills that you have. If I've done a project and I've ran a project, I've got project management skills. But because I don't have a project management qualification, in an interview to an employer who then reports on the skills shortage, I don't have the skills, but I haven't been able to communicate what I've done, showcasing those skills.
And definitely, that's a very point. I remember I was speaking to some guests right here on this platform, and they were saying that soft skills is a very, very delicate need for graduates, and especially good communication and emotional intelligence. A lack of those, you definitely are in for a ride. And now, Statistics South Africa reports that graduate unemployment is particularly high in certain fields such as humanities and social science. That's our department. It's very sad for us. What career planning strategies can graduate from high unemployment fields adopt to improve their employment prospects?
Oh, that's one that I'm really passionate about, Mr. Madisa, and I hope that our guests will derive a lot of value from that. So I think firstly, there's a misconception around employability when it comes to certain qualifications. And that lack of employability is directly related to the misconception that people have about what they can do with what they've obtained. And as you rightfully said, if we go back to your example, the journalism example, there were people that assumed that a journalism qualification only meant I could do journalism or radio, when in fact, you can take the knowledge from journalism, go into public relations, go into communication roles, go into social impact, go into marketing, go into so many elements that a lot of people don't think about. And I think, the reality is there's a lot of opportunities for students in the humanities. And what I found is that a lot of students in the humanities don't know where to look. We had a very interesting conversation this morning around, someone that we went to university with many, many years ago. And that person now is a country risk analyst.
Mm.
And, if you went to the average person, even on campus, if you had a quick interview with most TUT graduates, they'd assume risk would require a finance or economics qualification. But you can get into it with a political qualification because you're looking at political risk in
Yes.
countries in the African continent where businesses would like to expand and do business. So I think it's not a job shortage in the humanities. I think it's an element of miseducation around the opportunities in the humanities.
Yes.
Social impact. Every NPO has people in the humanities because every NPO needs a communication assistant. Every NPO needs a communication officer. Every NPO needs a grant fundraiser. It needs someone who can do research for the organization in politics, in economics, in philosophical elements, in anthropology. So it's not a lack of jobs. It's just miseducation around what jobs are available. And Mr. Madisa, this is important, and I must say this for the graduates to understand. If I did a B-Inch, very straightforward. I studied mechanical engineering. I can become a mechanical engineer. So what do I look for? Mechanical engineering internships. Very straightforward. If you did journalism, you first must be aware of all of the branches and
Yes.
then be aware of where those branches connect.
True.
So if I did a humanities degree in communications, journalism, or any of those elements, and every company has a marketing division, what do we mean there's no jobs for the humanities? Because it's there. If you did a politics degree with all these NPOs that operate in the political sphere, what do you mean there's no jobs for political studies?
True.
If you're saying you did anthropology, sociology, development studies, you cannot say there's no jobs. Every NPO is concerned with the development of society. So there's your sociology, there's your development studies, there's your anthropology. But you need to know where to look in order for you to find the jobs.
And true, definitely, I agree with that 120% once again, because eventually, if there was a risk of people not getting jobs, this university will definitely stop teaching or those courses. And I remember I was speaking to a couple of friends just before we wrote our examinations. We were doing advanced, then going to honors, and the one was saying, na journalism because and then I was saying, but there's corporate communication you could go into. There's a lot of spheres that definitely one can go into, Mr. Buthelezi. I think we need that. Definitely we need that. And I think maybe at some point we need to also look at some of the institutions that were within to say they need to be able to provide the clear log to say these are the branches that you can go into when you're studying this. Because as a person, when you start your journalism degree or communications, you do it for those first 3 years and you think, I want to go and do this, specifically this. And once you start having issues in terms of that, you're like, but it's no longer working for me. You don't have other alternatives that you can go into.
Exactly that, Mr. Matis. I think the reality is that, our people need to be educated around the opportunities that are available. And you are right that as higher institutions, we've got an integral role to play. And Mr. Matis, I must say that, as someone that's worked in the learnership space that has hired graduates before.
Mr. Buthelezi,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you so abruptly. So before you take that point, because I can see there's going to be a very important one, allow us to take a quick break and we'll definitely be back. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to inform you that once again, you are listening to TUTFM 96.2, amplifying voices, empowering lives. And this is another edition of the Groundbreakers. And on the line, we do have a Mr. Njabulo Malusi Buthelezi, who is the business consultant at Boston City campus. We're speaking Building Your Path, a comprehensive guide for graduates. We'll definitely take a quick break and we'll be back. Definitely 5 minutes after the hour 8 o'clock, and welcome back. If you had gone to get a glass of water or put your food in the microwave, just know that you are listening to TUTFM 96.2. We're amplifying voices, empowering lives, and this is the Groundbreakers, another edition of Plug a Graduate. And let me remind you that tonight we're speaking to Mr. Njabulo Malusi Buthelezi, who's an award-winning professional with 8 years of experience in various capacity within the educational sector. He is currently a business consultant at Boston City campus. Mr. Buthelezi, once again, welcome back. And please, sorry for cutting you off so abruptly before. You may continue with that point that you were making.
No worries. Thank you once again, Ms. Madisa, for having me. Thank you to Pearl for inviting me, and obviously, I'd like to thank a dear friend of mine, Bonzo Nache, for making all of this possible. So to go back to that point that I was making, it was around TUT graduates that having worked in the learnership space, having done a lot of recruitment of graduates, a lot of the best people that we ever hired were from TUT. So it's just that reassurance to the students at TUT that you're getting a world-class education. The only element that might make you feel differently, or to have a different perception around employability or any of those elements, is how do you translate those skills to the person in front of you who's interviewing you, who's trying to get a sense of what you learned and what you know. And a lot of the recruitment that we did was in the IT space. And TUT thrives, obviously being a university of technology. And I can tell you now that the education being offered at TUT is world class. And it starts off with the graduates understanding that first, that I'm getting a world class education and I'm privileged to be at TUT, and then to go and walk into every opportunity being cognizant of the fact that I'm coming from a great university that is up there with all the other universities. Because Mr. Madisa, we did recruitment everywhere from private institutions to public institutions. And I can tell you now that, in my experience, some of the best graduates that we ever hired, my previous work prior to Boston was from TUT. So it's just to reassure the graduates listening today, primarily from TUT and even from other institutions as well. But the focus was obviously on TUT to say that you are getting a world-class education. Don't be discouraged. Think about, how do I make people understand what I've spent 3 years learning at the institution?
Definitely, I have to say that's a very beautiful point right here at the TUT. We pride ourselves in being the People's University. We definitely empower. There is no way you can go out there and find a TUT graduate not knowing their story. We find, and because most of our universities are based, our campus are based in Pretoria, we like to say we Tshwane. Remember, we are the best. Now, speaking of experience, I want to bring in your own experiences, because looking at my research, it has indicated that 60% of graduates who set clear career goals are more likely to achieve a job satisfaction and career success. So first, let's look at the role they played throughout your journey. Did you at any point of your journey set career goals, and what role have they played in getting you where you are at this given moment of time?
Okay, thank you for that. That's actually a very good question. So to bring it back to my own experience, to kind of give that personal experience that graduates can take, something from, for me personally, I did set career goals in the beginning. I knew what I wanted from work, and I carry that with me to this day. That, a lot of people chase different elements at work, and none of them are wrong. But for me, what was important, it's still important to this day, and I'll lay out the framework for any graduate that might find it useful. So the first thing, Ms. Madisa, that I always think of when I take a job is how reputable is the organization that I want to work for.
Yes.
So the organization itself is important for me because I spend most of my time and my life dedicating my efforts to this place. So that was always important for me. And even now, there's an end goal in terms of, where I'd like to head off to. The second part of that I really always consciously think about is, if I'm at this point now, and this is where I want to be in a decade from now, what do I need to do between now and then? So, do I need to look at other opportunities? When am I projecting promotions? What do those promotions look like? What skills do I need for the promotions that I seek? So that there has to be a framework in place. And for me, there's definitely a framework that I have in mind, especially about the place that I'm going to work at. What am I actually trying to derive there? How long do I want to stay there? And all of those elements are important. And a lot of people are just happy to take opportunities. And I've said that it's a very risky, thing to start with. I understand the desperation, I understand the youth unemployment, I understand the lack of opportunities, but graduate unemployment is less than 10%. So if you look at the reality, 9 out of 10 graduates eventually find employment,
True, true.
some within the first 12 months of them graduating. So it starts off with understanding that as much as I'm also a youth, as much as I've gained experience, I've worked, I'm still within the youth definition that they speak of. But I never operate from, a place of desperation, because for me it's important where I go, because I need to then think about what comes after. I need to think about what's come before that will lead me to the place that I want to be at currently. So all of those elements are important, and I think it's something, Mr. Madisa, that a lot of graduates need to think about. That a lot of us are happy to go anywhere, and that's where you kind of start encountering problems, because you find yourself in a place doing something you don't like because you haven't thought about why you're doing it. So for me, youth development, assisting our youth, and this is why I'm here tonight, this is why I do the job that I do. For me, impact and the ability to increase access to education and to job opportunities to the youth is what keeps me going. So whether I'm doing that here, Nigeria, at
Yeah.
this company or that company, my base is there, that I want to impact lives. I want people to come back to me after 2 years and say, thank you, I'm now permanent at MTN. I'm now permanent at Vodacom. I'm happy you've actually linked me with this opportunity. I was able to finish my undergraduate qualification. That's what keeps me going. So what the role looks like is based on the foundation, and I don't steer away from that foundation. Hence, my entire career, I could have gone into anything.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
stayed in the educational sector because it's been intentional that this is where I'm supposed to be, not where I ended up because I took anything that came.
Definitely. And I remember a few years back before I came into uni, I was working at a certain company, and I was telling those people that you need to understand that purpose is not what you do, but what happens to people when you do what you do. So this is not particularly my space. I want to be in this certain space, and I would definitely get up every morning, even whether I'm getting 100 rands per month or for transport and whatsoever. But the mere fact that I'm doing what I love, it's what it counts. And I have to come and say, graduates often face uncertainty and numerous choices when transitioning from academia to the professional world. Where do you think they fall short in terms of setting career goals, and what are some of the problems you reckon they make?
Oh, that's actually a very good one. So I think that one relates, if we go back to the 5 point system that I spoke about earlier on,
Yeah.
that one would fall under number 4, which is adopting to workplace culture. Now, Mr. Madisa, I think the biggest mistake that I've seen that a lot of graduates make, especially those that don't come from what is traditionally defined as your first class Ivy League universities, although it's more of an American concept.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
do have our Ivy League top 3, top 4, top 5, is that there's that lack of confidence. And that lack of confidence relates to what a lot of psychologists define as the imposter syndrome. And you see it a lot with people coming from the non-traditional top universities. They come into the workplace thinking that they don't belong because of the way that people speak, because of the institutions that they come from, because of what they've done, because of the academic achievements. And I think one of the biggest gaps in kind of that transition is in graduates not accepting that they are no longer graduates and coming into graduate opportunities with a graduate mindset.
yeah.
And that again ties into that imposter syndrome. Oh, I just started, what do I know? Oh, I shouldn't contribute in this meeting. I'm sure everyone around me knows more. I don't even speak that well. Other people speak better than me. So that imposter syndrome translates into the work as well, where a lot of people don't take place. And I think, Mr. Madisa, if any graduates is listening today, what they can take away from this is when you make that transition from a graduate to an employee, act like an employee, see
Yeah,
yourself as an
yeah.
employee. Don't think of yourself as junior. Junior is what's on the title. So when I started working, Mr. Badisa, I would be what you probably define as your problematic employee in the very
Yeah,
beginning,
yeah,
not
yeah.
now. And problematic, and not even in a bad way, problematic in saying that I was never afraid to raise my hand up. I was never afraid of being wrong, and I was never afraid of taking my place. And what that did for me is very early on in my career, from the after the first year of working, the next year I was promoted to team leader. But you don't get promoted to another position having started out without taking your place. And I think if any graduate is just to walk away with anything today, take your place. You don't worry about how the next person sounds. Don't worry about someone studying at Harvard or Yale or whatever the case might be. I am brilliant. I'm from TUT. MTN has chosen me. Vodacom has chosen me. Netbank has chosen me. I belong. It is no by no mistake that I'm here. So act like a person who belongs in the space. And I think that's probably the biggest one.
And you see me smiling here. I'm taking 2 points from what your answer. First one, when people then graduate, they don't no longer see themselves as students, right? I saw a video on social media of this young man was graduating, I think from crèche, and then the caption was, when you then realize you're no longer a student, you have to become an employee, the responsibilities that comes with it, you need to take them head on. And when you speak of a team leader, there's a joke that I used to make with my friends to say, you're not even a team leader. You're not doing anything there. You're just a primary. But also speaking of Ivy Leagues of universities, a survey by the University of Cape Town had found that career planning workshops and significantly increases graduates' confidence in their career choices. And you did speak about confidence. I just want to understand, what are the key components of effective career planning workshops for graduates?
Oh, okay, that's actually a very good one. So again, it goes back to that elements of career mapping. So what is the actual purpose of the workshop and what is the actual purpose of the intervention? And I think the big gap, Mr. Madisa, is that as much as these interventions are done either at a micro or a macro level, there isn't any kind of outcome that is planned after these interventions or before these interventions are done. And then there isn't any post-intervention analysis to see the shift in knowledge or choices or anything that the learners didn't have prior to those interventions. So I think a lot of what needs to be done in career intervention plans is making learners or making people aware of the opportunities that exist out there, how to access those opportunities, and what are some of the things that are available. And I think a lot of the buzzwords, and I mentioned it earlier on around STEM and certain qualifications and certain elements taking precedence, is exactly what's causing this dilemma. And I think the reality is, and I always take a different stance from this, and some viewers might disagree, is there's a need for every single element that anyone does, because the economy functions on various inputs from various sectors. So we don't have 5 sectors. It's not just STEM. It extends beyond that. And I think the intervention should focus on that. And I've seen that these shifts in stating what needs to be done, stating what career options people have, limiting those options is the reason why these interventions are not effective, because firstly, people do not know the full scope of what's available. And even when they do, they are discouraged. And from the role that institutions play, there isn't, and maybe this is, the risk of intervention workshops in the first place, that a lot of the time, research isn't done on what is it that we want to achieve? How do we determine success when we start a career path or career intervention? And then after that, how do we define success? So a lot of that data is important, Mr. Madi. So what I would recommend in that case is first establish kind of how many people you're targeting with the intervention. What are the intervention goals that you measure during the intervention? And then post the intervention, you then follow up to see how much of that has been achieved. Then we can start working on quantitative data that will tell us how much of this career interventions, how much of these career workshops are actually yielding positive results.
True.
And I can tell you that not many are, because there isn't a defined goal going into it, and there isn't a post-intervention analysis afterwards.
And speaking of goals, I want to then ask, how then can we as graduates balance short-term and long-term career goals to ensure a sustained career growth?
That's a good one, Mr. Madi. That's actually a very good one. So I always say there is no short term, there's only long term.
Mhm.
And the short term is part of the long term. So I think the minute you view the short term as separate from the long term is where it falters in the first place.
Mm, mm.
That the long term is what is there. The short term is a part of the long term, not apart from the long term.
Oh,
So
beautifully.
once you've got the long term trajectory, the short term is only an element of it, and then you align the short term with the long term. But I think to make it more practical, a lot of people think of the short term because they think money. And I think that's probably one of the biggest considerations that people make in the short term, even if it means it will hamper the long term trajectory of their careers. And again, that's one of the biggest risks,
Mhm.
because you can get the money in the short term, but does this align with what you want to do?
Yes.
And if you look at mental health in the workplace, the rise in workplace suicides and all of these elements, Mr. Madisa, go back to the wrong message that we're sending out. We're not saying search for purpose, we're saying search for a job. We're saying
Yes,
search for
yes,
money.
yes. Yeah.
And money and a job is only a component, but you need to think of what is the actual purpose, what drives me. And if you focus on that as a long-term goal, even your short-term goals align with that. So if you want to make an impact on society, then social impact is the sector or industry for you.
Mhm.
So then you work for the NPOs/NGOs, and that's where you want to be. And then you think of roles that align in there. So what do I want to do? I want to impact women. I'm a woman. I'm passionate about women's rights. So then you align yourself with organizations that do, advocacy for women's rights,
Yeah,
advocacy
yeah.
for all of those. And so you're aligning yourself with that. And I always say, for those that think about money, if you follow passion, you'll be really good at what you do. And when you're the best at what you do, you don't need a specific qualification or
Mhm.
career to make money. You will make money being the best at what you do. There are guys at Kaya FM making way more than any chartered accountant. And the reality is, when you get good at what you do, when you're at a level of a DJ Fresh or a Lerato Hanyap, there's demand for what you do. You don't have to be something that you're not, that you don't like, because you're chasing short-term gains. So you decide early on, this is what I want to be, and then you work towards being that.
And I have to tell you that right here at UTFM, we don't follow the money, we follow the passion. That is why we are the best radio station in Pretoria. Definitely don't go anywhere. We'll definitely be back. Gonna take a quick break, and after that, so we'll then take some questions coming in from our listeners. Let me remind you that it is 24 minutes after the hour, 8 o'clock. And if you just tuned into this conversation, just know that we're speaking to Mr. Njabulo Malusi Buthelezi, and we're speaking on that conversation of building a career path. Definitely take a quick break, and we'll definitely be back. Edition of the Groundbreakers, another edition of Prague Graduate. And please let me remind you that you can follow us on our social media platforms. We are live right now on Facebook, which is at TUTFM 96.2, and Instagram is TUTFM underscore 962, X, formerly known as Twitter, at TUTFM and underscore 962. And you can check us on our WhatsApp channel, which is the number 012-382-9257. And Mr. Buthelezi, welcome back. And I hope you did hear that question coming in from one of our listeners. Would you mind to take it?
I actually didn't hear the question. I do apologize, Mr. Mattis. I actually didn't hear the question.
It's fine. We'll definitely take it again once again. But I want to, before we start, there was a comment on Facebook from Tiamo Bushoman, who was saying, thank you. Now, at least our people will know what to do after graduation, because life is different after you graduate. So they thank you for making time to speak with us and give these beautiful insights that you've been giving. And now to continue, and now we're coming back to say, are you taking it? All right. Please do listen to that question. We want taking it again.
Hi, this is Polelo N, and I'm a first year student in computer science extended. My question is, what can I do that can ensure that in the future I can get a job, like straight out coming from being a graduate? Thank you.
So if I understand correctly, the question was around, what to do to get a job as soon as she graduates, given
Yes.
that she's a first year student. So that's actually a very good question. And I like that she's thinking about employability or employment at a
Mhm.
first year level. So what is really important, somebody, so I'll just give this as a guideline to everyone else who's listening today. The first element is around resume or CV building, which I think is a massive gap or a massive point that a lot of people are not addressing. And I think a lot of that comes from the view that we have of CVs as just another task
Yeah.
and not seeing it for what it truly is, a portfolio and a possibility for you to show the world who you are and what makes you different. So I
Mhm.
think that's the first point that I'll give around thinking about how am I going to project myself to the world? What do
Yeah.
I want people to know about me? And knowing the value of a CV. And I think the problem is that a lot of people just, do it at a computer place and, put something together instead of giving it deep thought and thinking that someone else is going to be reading this. And if I don't enjoy reading it myself, I can't expect the next person to enjoy reading it.
Yes, true.
And then it's not going to separate me from the pile of CVs that every HR person in the country can tell you, sit on their desk for any one given job. The second part of that as a first year is thinking about networking and thinking
Mm.
about people in the industry. We used to, in the past, way before I joined Boston, we were involved in learnership and internship programs specifically for IT sector, students or students in software development and in cybersecurity. And one of the biggest elements that stood out was people that had a portfolio ready for us on GitHub. And what a
Mhm.
lot of people would do is they would reach out in second year saying that we're completing in third year. Please save a spot for me. I'd really love to join the
Oh yeah.
organization.
Yes.
And then they had an idea why they wanted to join the organization. And Bullet, that goes back to what I spoke about in the beginning, thinking about it beforehand. And I remember, kind of one specific one, second year, it went to the lead engineer and the lead engineer said, I'm happy to hire this person, kind of straight out of graduation or straight out of their program. And it's because of that initiative of thinking about where I want to go. So that advice, then, if we link it together, making sure that your CV is world class, spend a lot of time designing your CV because you are competing not only against students of TUT, but students across South Africa. The second part of that is networking. And the networking element is not just talking to people, but knowing why you're talking to them and knowing where you want to go. Because then you start having the right conversations early on. And then a third part of that, and probably the last point, is thinking about that career trajectory. So if I reach out to said person, this is what I hope to achieve from that conversation. This is where I hope to be by 2025, 2026, and I keep the conversation going. And you'd be so surprised at how many people are willing to give you a chance if you simply take that initiative, which links back to what I spoke about earlier on, that lack of confidence that students have, that lack of confidence that
True.
graduates have.
True.
And once you tell yourself that I belong and I'm capable and I know what I want and where I want to be, you'll find that as soon as you finish, you end up exactly where you wanted to be.
To be. Yeah.
Because we see it as, this person has just got a job, but we don't see the conversations that have been happening for 2 years
Mm.
prior to the person getting the job. And that's what I was talking about earlier on. That's the advice that I can give.
Definitely, and allow us to take a quick ad break because some of I clearly didn't get the proper communication, but eventually we good. We're good to go. All right. I didn't get the communication clearly, so but thank you so much for answering that question. And I have to say that when we start getting into varsities, we definitely have to refer those CVs as resumes because when you start saying CV, you'll start writing curricular vampire there, and it is going to be definitely a problem. So resume will definitely have to stand out. And now we're coming here to say that according to LinkedIn, LinkedIn Workforce report, the demand for digital skills in South Africa has increased a lot in the past 5 years, right? Now, does this underscore the growing significant and a pressing need for students in all fields to develop this kind of skills?
100%, 100%. That's one of the most prominent trends, and LinkedIn is right in saying that. I think AI for many of us employees has become an integral part of what we do, and we interact with it on a daily basis. Especially if you look at generative AI, so you think of your chat GPTs, your co-pilots on Bing. So it's become a huge part of what everyone kind of uses in their day to day. But to bring it back to digital skills, it's one element that is completely underutilized in terms of us being able to cultivate those skills
Yeah.
in the broader society. And it brings kind of us back to that point of digital skills are important as we head into a different form or different era of work. And I think a lot of people are not thinking about that when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, what do we actually mean when we say that, and what does that actually look like? And there's a
Yes.
lot of studies, especially from a lot of authors within the fields of future studies, that have predicted generative AI to be at its infant stage and for AI to be a part of most jobs by 2050. And if you don't kind of follow the trends in
True.
terms of the
Yeah.
skills that are needed, you get left behind. And to emphasize that, I think it is really important for any graduate to think about, how do I translate these skills? Because if you really think about it, Polelo, most of the work that is done by desk oriented employees is done on a laptop or on a computer,
True.
which already speaks to then the need to be acquainted with a computer and digital skills. And one of the big elements, and I'll speak about this, and if any graduate is listening tonight, it's very important to develop these skills before you get to the workplace. You find a lot of people starting off not knowing how to use Microsoft Word, not knowing how to
Exactly.
use Excel, not knowing how to use PowerPoint. So all of these things are not really focused on, because we focus on the theoretical elements of the learning and we forget the practicality and being able to apply the theory to work. So it's really important to bridge that divide. If you're in a tech-related degree or engineering, most of those skills are going to be picked up in your undergrad qualification. But for most people in other degrees that are non-technical, it's important to ensure that you understand what the digital trends are, look at where kind of the workplace is going in the next 5 or 10 years. And what I normally like doing is I normally like looking at what does work look like by 2050, and then what does work kind of look like in the next millennia. So it's really important to think about those things,
Yeah.
and hence those things tie into the career mapping. If I'm going to work another 30 years, what does work even look like in 30 years from now?
True.
So that
Definitely.
really
Yeah.
that brings
Beautifully.
the whole.
Beautifully said, and I have to say I love what you're saying, that the fourth industrial revolution, it's moving fastly. So, and if people don't get on this train, I know Namelas para from Marava start, it's not gonna work, it's gonna get you left behind. But before I take another question, we have a WhatsApp question coming in from our line. Please do take a listen to that.
My name is Murindeni Modal. I'm a first year information technology student at TUT. So I would like to ask, once I'm done with school and I'm struggling to find employment, so what are the steps that I can take?
You got that, Mr. Buthelezi?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. So I've got a bit of a different view on this, but I will share that view. So I think we first need to unpack the elements of struggling to get work,
Hmm.
and what does that actually mean for most people. And what I found, and again, everyone listening tonight, please, before you get angry with me about my train of thoughts,
Yeah.
most people that say, Polelo, that I haven't found work, what I found is they haven't applied enough. And a
Mm.
lot of people say, no, you can't say that. I've been applying since 2018. But I always say it's not about since when have you been applying, but how much have you been applying.
True.
And frequency for me in most conversations with graduates that I've mentored is someone will say to me, I've been looking for a job for 6 months and I haven't found a job. And then I say, okay, how many applications have you made
Have
in
you
six
sent?
months?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've sent about 50. And then I say 50 in 6 months is less than 10 a month. And, even for you and I, who have worked, it would be very hard for you and I to send 10 applications and to land a job.
True.
And if you're sending 10 a month, you're prolonging the time that it takes to get a job. There's actually some very interesting research on the question, and I'll get to how do you get the job. There's actually interesting research on that question, which I think, if anything to take away from tonight is there was some interesting research about it's taking 300 job applications for someone to land a role. Now, obviously, this is not everyone's reality. Some people apply once, get a job, apply 10 times, get a job,
Yeah.
apply 50 times, get a job. But if on average, it takes the average person 300 job applications to get a job, that already speaks to how competitive the job landscape is.
True.
Now, what to do when you're not getting a job, to answer her question, is I firstly say before you say I cannot get a job, look at frequency. And I'll speak of personal experience on my side so the graduates get to understand. Whenever I was looking for an opportunity, applying for me was a job. So I've never been unemployed.
Oh, yes.
My job, if I don't have a job, is to look for a job.
Yeah.
Now, Polelo, what does that look like? I can tell you this now. There's no one in the country saying every day at 8 o'clock, I wake up and I apply and I end my day at 5 o'clock like someone who's employed.
Yeah.
Every single day, Monday to Friday, who can tell me that if I wake up 8 o'clock and I look, even from looking through the newspaper, I look through the newspaper every single day, 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. You will not spend months without a job. And anyone who's saying, I haven't found a job, my question is, have you done 500 applications? Have you done 750? Have you done 1,000? So if you're saying you haven't been working since 2018, have you done 5,000 applications? Or you haven't been working since 2018, but you've done maybe 140, So for me, I want a lot of graduates to shift that mindset of it's going to be difficult to find a job. I honestly don't believe so. I think the element that people need to focus on is how much time am I investing when looking for a job. Well, I'm unemployed today, and I don't say this to graduates, it even applies to me. If today I'm unemployed, first thing I do tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock when you go to work, I'm also working. But what is my job? My job is to look for a job because you're already at your job.
At a job, yeah, definitely.
So that's my job. And if you find that you're doing that, and you're doing that for I've honestly, and I can honestly share some hope to graduates. Guys, I've advised so many people to do this, and every time a person has done this, it doesn't take them more than 3 months to find a job. Because when you spend that much time looking for a job, it's going to be very, very, very hard for you to not find one if you take it as I'm never unemployed. Even today, I could quit my job today. I'm never unemployed.
Yeah.
When I wake up tomorrow morning, my job is to look for a job. So I'm already working. The only difference between then, if I was unemployed tomorrow and you were still working, Polelo at the end of December is going to get a salary.
Yeah.
My salary might come end of Feb, but December I'm working, looking for a job is working. January I'm working, I'm looking for a job. Probably by January or sometime around there, I'll find something. In February, I start the job. But I want graduates to move away from, I understand the unemployment. I know unemployment is high. And it's because we're not having these honest conversations. And I want any TUT students and graduates to remove that from their mind. As high as youth unemployment is, I never think of, if I lose my job, I'm going to have a hard time finding the job. I don't think so. Because I've done it time and time again. I've gone from this company to that company to that company. And it's not because I'm special. It's not because of some miracle. I don't have a qualification that no one else has. What I do have that might set me apart from someone else is someone can say, Ish, I'm not going to find a job.
You
I'm
find
going to say to you, Polelo, by end of December, I'll find a job.
yeah,
So it's first a shift in mindset,
yeah.
and then also understanding the reality that
Mhm.
the more I do, the higher the chances of
This
getting
are.
something.
Yeah, definitely. And it goes back to when I told you that I was working at a certain company. It took me 3 months to land that job. And what I would do is that every single day I would go to that workplace just like everybody else. When they knock off at 5 o'clock, I'd definitely come back with that as if I was working. And eventually, when I got employed, I was like, we are within. And definitely, we're going to take two more questions coming in from our listeners. Please do tune in into that questions.
My question is, what can I do that can ensure that in the future I can get a job, like straight out coming from, hi, this is Selene and I'm a first year student in computer science extended. My question is, what can I do that can ensure that in the future I can get a job, like straight out coming from being a graduate? Thank you.
Good evening. My question would be because there is an app that would then screen CVs when one apply for a vacancy. So I wanted to know to say, how do we mitigate to make sure that it doesn't hinder them before they could get to the actual employer? How do we then come up with a way that those CVs they get to also be seen? Because sometimes it might get that it hinders them from actually getting to the actual person who would then give an employment. So I want to know, how do we mitigate that?
You got both of them?
I did indeed.
All
Learn. Thank you so much for that. So I'll start off with the first one.
Yeah.
And again, I'm here on this platform to be honest with graduates from my experience, from what I've seen in the workplace. So you might disagree with me on certain points, but with the first one, to answer it very simply with a very short answer, is if you want to get a job straight out of university, CV aside, career mapping aside, be the best. And I think that's one element that's not spoken enough about. A lot of us say if I pass, and as long as I pass, or my course is hard, so of course my marks are not going to be high.
Yeah.
And I think again it's around shifting that mindset to say that engineering is hard, but people pass it with cum laude. That IT is not easy, but people pass it with distinction. So
Yeah.
it's around shifting that mindset that what I'm doing is difficult, therefore I'm not going to do it well. So to answer that first question, what will set you apart from everyone else's marks? And a lot of people don't talk about how important it is. Oh, no, it doesn't matter. It does. Because when you're sitting with a pile of 50 applications and the only person from that 50 is someone with a cum laude pass, they're definitely getting a call.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that separates, kind of everyone else from the person that gets the opportunities easier. And I've seen it happen. I mean, the earning potential is higher. So the better you perform, the better your life outcomes, because the higher you perform, the better the company you'll start at, the higher the salary you'll start at. And then that has an impact on how the rest of your career pans out. And that's not to say that if you're a C student or a B student or a D student that you'll never get there. But I'm just answering that honest question that a lot of students are asking themselves: what will make me stand out?
Yeah.
And I have to say to you that it's performance. And the lie that we've told ourselves that it doesn't matter, it does. And it's really, really important to think about that. So if you're still in first year, you can't change first year. 2024 is done. But go into 2025 saying, I want to be the best in my class at TUT.
I
And
love
instead of saying that,
I love that. I love that when you say be the best. And I have to remind our listeners that the TUTFM is the best in Pretoria, the best the Gauteng could offer. Definitely. You
guys,
can take
listen
this.
to the Prince of Pretoria. In
Yeah.
case you don't know, Polelo the Prince of Pretoria.
All right. You can take the second question.
Of course. So the second one is around how do I, bypass ATS and the concern. So I'll firstly have to say that in my experience with a lot of the recruitment agencies, with a lot of HR professionals, I don't know how frequently used ATS is in South Africa. I've personally never experienced it being utilized at an HR level in any company that I've worked for. And it's not to say that it isn't. I think what a lot of companies are also doing as a filter is there are different requirements for job applications. Submit a portfolio, that's enough to filter. A lot of people thought, oh, I'm not going to do that. And they might say, we'll ask you to do a presentation. A lot of people say, oh, I'm not going to do a presentation. So there's different ways in which applications are filtered. But from an ATS utilization aspect, perhaps in some of the larger organizations where there are resources, it is being utilized. And then to answer that question specifically, if we're talking about where it is utilized, is thinking about what is required from the job description and how does my CV match up to that. And Blair, a lot of the people that are concerned about their applications being filtered out are people that are looking for opportunities not relevant to them in hopes of getting a job. And it goes back to what we spoke about earlier on, because if I am a mechanical engineer, 5 years experience, and the posts are looking for a mechanical engineer, 5 years experience, my question is how would that essentially be blocked by ATS because I have the prerequisite, qualifications, experience required by the job post. So I think then to answer that question, make sure that your CV is relevant, ensure that you're applying for the right jobs, relevant jobs. I always say to graduates, as much as I'm saying do more in terms of frequency, but do more where you qualify. Because otherwise you'll say, I've done 1,000 jobs. And if you say, okay, Njabulo, I've done 1,000 jobs, you're wrong. Then my next question is how many of those 1,000 jobs were relevant to you? And then those are the things that people need to think about. So, the short answer to that, make sure your CV is relevant to the jobs that you're applying for. And that's how you avoid, your CV being lost in the pile.
Just want to ask my producer, do we have any other questions? And how everything is done. With that being said, Mr. Buthelezi, I just like to thank you so much for making time to speak with us this evening. Very beautiful answers that you gave, very insightful answers and very impactful. I loved what Tiamo Bushoman was saying on a comment on Facebook that she thanks you so much for making time to speak with us tonight, because then our graduates will definitely know what to do after graduating. So with that being said, I do hope we'll continue having other conversations as time goes by. But with that given said, I have to say, have yourself a lovely evening, and thank you so much for making time to speak with us.
No, thank you so much, Polelo, for having me. And yeah, the platform is open. Graduates can reach out to me. I'm available on LinkedIn, Njabulo Malusi Buthelezi, and any help that anyone might need in terms of guidance. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm here to do. And we can definitely connect and have these discussions. And yeah, so I think you can also share some of my other social media details, Facebook, Instagram. I'm here to help and support the graduates, and that's why I came on this platform today. And I'd really like to thank you for having me, and I can't wait. And hopefully next time I get to join you in studio.
Definitely, and thank you, and good night.
The Groundbreakers, Mondays to Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. on TUT FM.